and thank you for watching Community Voice Channel. In tonight's episode, we're going to be going over the steampunk authors featuring mixed genres, also including time traveling and horror. Let's check it out.
And I have been to a steampunk event before, so one or two. I see we have a lot of goggles around and flourishing things, so we'll start with Amanda. A.L. Dubrow. We'll work our way around this way.
Alright, hi everybody, I'm Amanda A.L. Dubrow. I write adult and YA, science fiction, fantasy, horror, pretty much all the subgenres that exist, because I can't stay in one box. So that's about me.
Same. I write lots of different genres. I'm Liz Delton. I write YA fantasy, steampunk, gaslamp fantasy, and some nonfiction for writers.
I'm Renee Fleury. I am also a cross-genre author. Currently my only published work is Skyhawk Building Steam. It is a steampunk, first book in a steampunk series, but I also write historical fiction and general, like, modern fantasy.
I'm Tom Truelove. My published work is accidentally horror, which is not the genre I was aiming at, but that's what sold first. I'm the lead developer for the not cookbook stuff that Red Duke Games is doing. They're the Necro Nom 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 people. And some of that, most of that is horror still.
I'm Jessica Lucci, steampunk author, and I'm best known for the Watch City Steampunk, the festival and the Watch City trilogy. And everybody cares about my bird Lamar. Nobody cares about me.
I care about you too.
Lamar was also on this panel when we did it.
She has been on this panel before, in a different time and space.
Yes.
Yes.
Last year she was on the panel with the snake, with my snake.
Yes, she was.
Yeah. Not together.
My name is Mark Piggott. I write fantasy and I've just started into steampunk in my writing, mixing it with fantasy, but I actually have a full-blown steampunk historical fiction coming out next year, so my first foray into that.
You had a breakfast? And I'm Professor Cogdom because we're in New England. If we were actually in Italy, we would pronounce cognome, but nobody understands that. So I thought we'll play on words. It is my nom de plume because I am indeed an academic and I teach college full time. And so on that side, I write things that are more academic, obviously, but also sort of what they call literary fiction. I don't see the difference myself. I think it's just like it's good writing. It's good writing. But under this name, you'll find a lot of things that are steampunk and related genres. Some of them set in a New England that doesn't exist, but I wish it did. So.
I'm Robert Reed. I'm a computer programmer by profession. I write mainly science fiction, animal stories for kids, and I just had, a few weeks ago, I had my first steampunk book printed up, and that's it.
I'm Bert Piedmont, and I write what I call weird fiction. I write a mixture of like horror and paranormal and time travel and talking dinosaurs, and I don't really know what it is.
And lizards.
Wizards. Mermaids.
The earliest story that I've found is is part of the Hindu myth, where a king has a daughter who's so accomplished, so beautiful, he doesn't think any man he knows would be a suitable husband. So he goes to the land of the gods and he speaks to the gods, and after being there a while, hosting those two, they ask, what about, which of the people I know would be a suitable husband, which of the king? And the gods laugh, because it's like everybody you know is gone. You're hundreds of years have passed on Earth, and in this realm, time passes slowly. So he's really bummed. His daughter's upset. And the gods wind up saying that one of the gods' avatars on Earth is a perfectly suitable husband for her, and that's who she winds up marrying. So, romance, it's true romance in the sense as a happily ever after.
Do you remember which god? I'm very into Hinduism.
I will look it up. I knew it and then I forgot it last night.
Message everybody.
Yes, I will. It's a great story.
We can all play with that.
I play with Hindu mythology in my own writing, so I'm very interested. They do more of that time travel stuff. It's kind of like the realm of the Fae in Celtic
Yeah,
mythology.
exactly. Much like the realm of the Fae, right? Where we've all seen stories, you know, Strange and Norrell, for example. You leave and you go to land of the Fae. And maybe you come back or not. They might keep your kid. They might grow up. So Renee, as long as you mentioned, Building Steam does have time travel in it, does it not?
And dimension hopping, it
And dimension
certainly
hopping.
does. They do quite a bit of both. There's a number of instances in which they switch from one year to the next. And it's a little bit of back and forth. I try to keep it as consistent as I possibly can, but also dimension hopping. Whereas they end up in our realm in 1884. These people are from their own steampunk realm. Yours also 1884, but they go like 4 months into the past, but into another dimension, basically a parallel reality where steampunk doesn't exist. They don't have airships, and in a world where both Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla do exist, in their realm they do not. However, Nikola Tesla ends up being the main character's bounty, so I play a little bit with that. It's fun.
And as long as Tesla was mentioned, I'd like to see a raise of hands of how many of the authors have had Tesla show up in one of their works. Yeah, it's a pretty common one. Huh? So I've actually been on panels where every author had Tesla show up. He's a favorite.
It's hard not to.
I have portrayed Tesla in a wrestling presentation on stage.
Wow.
We will definitely have a panel on that in some
I didn't
future
see
time and
that.
date. So let's jump over to Jesse, because you also have time traveling in New England for Salem Switch.
Yes. So in Salem Switch, it's this group of women from Waltham who go to a world like Atlantis, and they find out Nikola Tesla's technology and use that for time travel.
So, and they are seen as witches in Salem during that time, right?
And in Salem Switch,
Yeah.
I was thinking of Subton Switch, I'm
Something
sorry.
to-
But in Salem Switch, they travel back from the 1800s to the 1600s, where because they're women and they're smart, well, they must be witches.
That's
So,
Although, you know what, we have witches in our community, so
We
they're,
do.
yeah, they're definitely witches, right? So, and druids, and so in the time traveling world, we see a lot of 1800, 1700 stuff in the steampunk genre, but the other genres have it too, and you really have two types of time travel, right? You have the fantastical ones, and where there's supernatural forces involved. And then you also have the scientific ones, like one of my favorite is City on the Edge of Forever. Tom is very familiar with that. This is one of the classic Star Trek stories. But Tom, you also work with Williana on Time Immemorial, right?
We created that, and short version of that, I was working for someone who was developing a pitch for Star Trek before Discovery, Prodigy, and that did not become a Star Trek. It did become something they stole.
No, in Hollywood, I can't imagine.
And so right around the time that was fizzling out, I said, we're taking this character back. That became Time Immemorial. I was working with someone who said, I want to do an anthology show. You don't know which captain or which starship you're going to be tuning in for every week. And I said, great, how many of them are women? And he said, ooh, that's a good idea. Maybe one should be. And I said, yeah, we're going to take her back.
Yeah. So what makes time travel so interesting that we'd like to see it? The idea of going to another.
I think all the details that we don't have now, the details in the historical aspect of Outlander, because it's kind of historical fiction / romance, and I think all the details that we get to see that we don't experience, like the day-to-day even, I think that's the most interesting part of the traveling back into time, because you can see all this stuff that the way things used to be, the way they're not anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you also do write stories that take place in other time periods, right? So what draws you to the idea that you can go to another dimension, that you can go to another world?
So yeah, like I do more otherworld stuff than
Yeah,
different
you do otherworld
time.
stuff, right?
So my Dark Covenant universe is entirely goes back and forth into many different worlds. It's basically so my main characters basically kind of have like a will parry ability where they can just cut open and just go into different universes. So that's like, in my world, the different paranormal creatures live in different worlds, and they interact with each other in that manner, and my witches have the ability to move, back and forth with their void magic and that kind of thing. So I just like it because, it's like writing fantasy in a contemporary setting, and I can be like, well, I feel like dealing with some dragons today, so let's just hop into another world that's got some dragons.
Yeah, exactly.
And my contemporary high schooler can go and just chill with some dragons, or hang out with the fae, or go, on an adventure with some werewolves, and so it makes it like pretty easy because she can just go back and forth wherever she wants to, and it's not just her, like all the different characters can move back and forth. My angels and my demons are on different parallel worlds, so that's kind of how I have it all set up, where everybody exists on different parallel worlds to ours, and they do run on a different time, so that I do play a little bit with time in mine as well. It's not necessarily time travel, but it is a time slip almost.
Time slip, right?
There was dinosaurs, intelligent dinosaurs that evolved alongside of mankind, but only in the New World. So that when the Spanish came over to conquer the Aztecs had velociraptor pets. It's the world into a new direction, and that's where basically everything I write is set with some connection to that world. Even if it looks like this world, it's connected to that world if you look deep enough.
Because you have cats. Are they in our world, or are they in their own world?
Okay, well, kind of in between, because at first when I started writing these stories, I was just drawing comics in 3rd grade, and I came up with the idea of Animal Island. I didn't know there was a real Animal Island at the time, but I put it in the middle of the Pacific, where out as far away from human society as could possibly be. But then I thought, well, maybe it's a parallel Earth, because they have all the same holidays and the same things we do, but so basically it's maybe I'll just change it to a parallel.
What pulls you into another dimension that you would want to be there, and which one do you want to go to? We're going to ask everybody that one.
Okay, well that's good. Well, I think writers, we're just kind of inherently curious people. We like weird things. We like to be somewhere else. I mean, when you think about fiction over the last few, I think 3-4 decades especially, and we've started to get more dimensional travel, we're talking about world building, right? A place you want to be. I don't know how you all feel about what you read when you were children, but I think that influences us, as Nora Ephraim said, in a way that nothing else does. And I remember reading Narnia when I was a child and actually looking to get into a wardrobe. Because when you're 6 years old, you go, yeah, I wish I could do that.
Yeah, sure.
And then when you're 40, 50, you still say, I wish I could do that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in my 50s, I still wish I could do that.
You know?
So, Mr. Biggett, you actually have true time travel, though, in your stories, no?
Well, it's not true time travel. It's a way of basically stepping out of our world into
Arthurian, right?
the Arthurian world, through the Bermuda Triangle. That's the best way I can. That's how I work things. I took the Arthurian legend after the death of King Arthur, and I said, what happened to the magic in our world after he died? And so in my world, Merlin basically took his power, put it through Excalibur, and brought everything that was magic to Avalon. And Avalon exists outside of time and space. It's on our world, but it's just out. Can't get there normally through normal means. But now you can get there through the Bermuda Triangle, which is basically, we think of where everything has disappeared over the years. It hasn't disappeared. It's basically it's on Avalon.
Yeah, a lot of my socks in there. Actually.
Yes.
Renee, I know you're a big fan of Egyptology. Right?
I am. I actually have a novel that is written but unpublished. It's ancient Egyptian historical fiction, and funny enough, the dates match up to our modern era. It's just BCE. So these characters would have been alive in 2022 BCE. And so I know a lot about Egyptology. I did go to school for archaeology and linguistics.
Even some of your ink is.
Yes, I have Haru, I have Horus, sporting that with my Celtic poem underneath. So I've done a significant amount of research on Egyptology, and of course Stargate is probably the most prominent Egyptian fiction and pop culture. And The Mummy and The Mummy Returns, some of my absolute favorite movies. They're so much fun.
Just rewatched The Mummy. It holds up a lot better than I thought it would.
Oh, it does. It's a classic, but also a cult classic. It's great.
And now it's been brought into the Marvel universe because Moon Knight is out.
That's right. Yes, Moon Knight's really good.
So why do we love these otherworldly creatures coming into our world.
Because kind of what Professor Cognell was saying is we still want to believe that these things exist. We still want to believe in this other world. And even if we can't go into Narnia, even if we can't go back into our own pasts and change things, we can still have this belief that another plane or time travel exists to satisfy our own need for that.
Yeah, and let's face it, some of the things that we take for granted, especially our technology, our lights, our water, we romanticize the past, but sometimes those times were really rough to live in, right? Like, I know at COGS I did a panel on disasters in travel, and some of them were really, really awful, right? So the SS Sultana exploded, but the Dahmer party, because, you're traveling in the 1800s, and it's not like traveling today. You don't run out of gas, you run out of food, right? So nowadays, you couldn't run out of gas if you don't have $100.
But I think as writers, that's something we all do, is we're taking these stories. I mean, everybody here has mentioned everything from Hindu, Egypt, we're crossing so many different Celtic, so many boundaries. And that's what we tap into as writers to keep those stories going. We're inspired by the past to write something more for the future.
And sometimes we're inspired to the future, right? I mean,
yes.
How many of us haven't loved future speculative fiction, right? Something where the world's going, right? Or written it, right? Yeah. So in a lot of cases, writing about what could be, what wouldn't be. I was watching Deep Space Nine the other night, and there's a lot of dimension hopping, probably more than any of the other Star Trek series, right? With Cisco and Gods and things like that. And Avery Brooks, I would show up for Avery Brooks alone. So the question is, in terms of your own writing or writing of other authors, can you tell me which book that involves dimension hopping and time travel you think is a must read? I'll start with you, Bert. And it could be your own book.
I think Outlander is a really good one, and I think one of the reasons why is for any well-written time travel is the inherent conflict between the person who's moved in time and the time that they go into is so very different, and that's kind of what is so attractive. It's like you're watching this person and almost every single thing they do is really frustrating.
Yes.
So it's just like,
because
you
Claire
go back in
knows
time.
modern medicine, right?
You go back in time and you're walking down the street and you're a witch just because you're wearing Levi's. You know what I mean? And it's just like the simplest little things you do are wrong. Your language is wrong. Your vowels are wrong. If you go back far enough in the past beyond the great vowel shift, and people aren't going to be able to understand you, and you really just get this sense of how far away we are from where we used to be, but at the same time, there's the universalness of human experience that's still the same, and then there's still that connection. And if a writer is really good, they can show both of those things at the same time.
I think that, the first book I remember reading about time travel was, of course, H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. And I think the thing about that one is it was like probably one of the earliest time travel stories. And it focused on, at first, like the machine itself, the concept of, how things move forward or backward in time. Now, even though in the original book he didn't go into the past, like in the movie remake, just the book itself, the character was interested in where mankind's going.
Yeah, the Morlocks and Eloi, right?
Yeah, we have all this history written down, and you could, easily find out all about history by reading the books. But nobody had any idea what was coming in the future. So
and some authors like
Verne forward.
To have my credentials, here's my transtemporal sonic screwdriver.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
It's a lot of power right now, but that happens when you hop dimensions.
And when you get back to the TARDIS, you can power it up.
I almost broke my.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I love the Doctor. I grew up watching the Doctor, and I love the new stuff and the old stuff. It's all great.
Was Tom Baker your first Doctor?
Tom Baker was my first Doctor.
Me too.
Yes.
And so great is the Doctor.
You're betting the odds on the age, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I
Can't
love
help
that.
that.
You can't.
Use the classic Doctor.
Yes,
What do you
that's exactly it.
But there's so many great. One of the things I love about it is there's so many great stories from all of time and space, or at least Britain. Although everyone seems to have a British accent, I'm not quite sure why that happens all over time and space. But yeah, you know, it's interesting when you talk about that science, and again, whether it's science or whether it's fantasy or science fantasy or whatever you want to call it, it really depends on the writer and what they think they can pull off, right? Because you want the story to be believable, whatever the mechanism is. I don't think that one is better than the other, which is a lot of the conversations when I was doing my MFA program about literary fiction versus genre, and I was like, it's about story.
Yeah.
You know, it's about how do you get that story, and you can't help but write the story that comes to you.
Professor, since we're in England, let's talk about the Arthurian legends. Is this where you'd want to go if you can go anywhere in space and time?
You know, actually, that's very interesting. I like that idea. But, you know, I've recently been invited to be part of a story with, it's basically 5 different novellas, different writers, and I got assigned Oz, and I love it. So
Oz is great.
these modern characters, these modern people end up going to different realms, and my character is, I can't tell too much.
We're talking about Oz, we're talking about the wizard, right?
The
We're not
Wizard
talking
of
about
Oz. Well, now,
Myth
whether she
Adventures
runs
with
into the wizard,
Steve and Oz,
my
right?
protagonist is a 10-year-old female,
Mm-hmm.
and she's the little sister of the main character. And so we're all writing different stories, and so she's going to Oz. And so I don't know that the wizard will be there, it depends. I mean, Frank Baum wrote, I think, 19
'Cause
Oz
they're-
novels, and
yeah.
then they
Oh,
continued
yeah,
them
yeah.
afterwards,
Bunch of
another,
them, right?
something like 20. So,
Yeah.
but I love that
There are
language.
52 Oz novels, 14 of which were written by Baum. The publisher was very selective about who got the job in what order.
Who's the most interesting of the characters? Is it Merlin? Is it Arthur? Is it Lancelot? Guinevere?
Well,
Is it Morgana? Or
But see, I mean, it's hard for me to go that route because in my stories we're talking thousands of years has passed. I mean, it
Right.
still looks the same. It's still a medieval society.
But
as
Arthur
it is
is already
because
gone, right?
well, yeah, and so but his descendants still rule. The descendants of Arthur and Guinevere are the ones that rule over Avalon and everything. And Merlin has passed on his knowledge through apprentices upon apprentice, you know, and things along that line. So I've tried to continue the story along, and the only thing that has remained the same is like the elves are still thousands of years old. So the ones that were originally are there within my story. But you know, the idea behind it was that even though time has passed slower on the outside world, and there different time has passed different between the two areas. There's that medieval society still exists and everything because they've gone more towards magic and less away from technology.
Jess, let's go there because in your stories, most of the ones I've read, you do go back in time and Salem switch to an era in New England that everybody finds interesting.
Yes, the time of the Salem witch trials is historic, and it's interesting because it's fascinating how people could turn against each other so easily.
Mm-hmm.
And so I investigated that using real history, real information from the time. So I gave honor to the people who died, and I also gave honor to modern day Wiccans. So they can understand too how magic can exist in another world, and how it can either harm people or help people depending on how you use it. And part of the magic is science.
And you and Bert are both going to be at that witch event in Salem?
No, just
Oh.
me.
Just me.
Bert and I are going to a day together
Yeah,
in
for
Salem.
my birthday.
Oh, nice.
Next month.
Happy birthday.
And I just want to say I want to change my answer because I think my answer should have been Sound of Thunder from Ray Bradbury.
You know, in theory, Star Trek is science, right? It's, you know.
It depends on which episode.
Yeah, it depends on which episode, right? And then they start to get into more of the medical, physical, because the early gods in Star Trek always turned out to just be powerful
Well,
beings, right?
one of Gene Roddenberry's occasionally annoying but persistent tropes was evolution results in godhood. And to relate that to something you asked earlier about where would you want to, what dimension
Yeah.
would you want to go to if I had that power at the end of Roddenberry's evolutionary process, I'd go to a dimension where my twin brother did not forget my birthday.
That is a fascinating thing. So
The dimensional travel that I'm most intrigued by has to be the mythological liminal spaces, whether that's Celtic otherworld or ancient Greek catabasis. They're not dimensions unless, as I said earlier, unless death counts as crossing that boundary.
But since we're talking about crossing over into death, that was a really, really big subject for the Egyptians, Renee, right? I mean,
It was.
to pass on to the next world, right? Be judged.
Well, with the Egyptians, a lot of people think that they glorified death. They actually glorified life. And it's funny you mentioned reincarnation and the ghost still being there. Well, it definitely does tap into Egyptian mythology, where they believed rebirth was a huge part of their culture and their belief system. The idea to get to the afterlife wasn't necessarily to go to a heaven-like state, but it was to continue on living, basically go into the next life. But it's funny that you mentioned, you can't be a ghost and be reincarnated at the same time, and you mentioned Hinduism. Well, in Hinduism, they'll tell you a different story. Sure you can. And actually, in one of my books, not the Egyptian one, it's more Celtic based, but it is based around here actually. It's called Set in Stone. It takes place, some of the folklore of the stone chambers in New York and New England. Most of it takes place in Putnam County, New York. And it's kind of rolling in a lot of the topics we've covered here. What are the beings there? The primary metaphysical beings, he is a jinn, but he ends up being hinted at that he is in fact a Hindu god. So a little bit of Hinduism is rolled in there, but then his love interest is a human, but she also has basically an avatar here on Earth who is technically a ghost. So like her higher self certainly did stay behind as a ghost, but also reincarnated and into a regular flesh and blood human who now is in love with, or hints of falling in love with, this jinn who has seen her in both forms, and he still has to deal with both forms, her past self lingering as a ghost as well as her.
Liz, what about you?
Everything.
Where do you enjoy most in that kind of idea of going to another dimension or traveling through time? And which stories most influenced you? Which ones would you say, yeah, you want to know about this one?
I'm gonna throw out an outlier, and it's definitely
That's okay. Outliers are
a
good.
random young adult book, a series called Everworld. Has anyone ever seen that? It's by Kay Applegate, and it's basically 4 high schoolers travel to Everworld, and it's where sections of our world and their gods are all plopped together like on a quilt of a world. So the Aztecs are right next to the Vikings, and so the Vikings raid them sometimes. And there's the Celtic gods are, next to so-and-so. And that one did really inspire my Realm of Camellia series. It's a portal fantasy. Because I debated whether I wanted to do a portal fantasy or not, and I had a list of all of my favorite portal fantasies. I had Oz, Wonderland. Those are my top
Narnia's
2.
another one that's
and
like
Narnia.
That, right?
So those were like my top reads as a young child, and I said I want to do a portal fantasy. So it all kind of started about a door. So a magical door in the woods, and there we go to the Realm of Camellia, which is a Japanese-inspired realm where they kind of like what your Avalon, you were saying it's Avalon and they've stayed in medieval times. So my realm is they've stayed in like essentially samurai era times because they are focusing on their magic as well. So there's light and shadow magic, and I visited Japan a couple of times, and some Shinto shrines, and just gathered a lot of mythology and read about the kami and used that to influence my portal fantasy. So
That's why we all deal with portals. I do that a lot in Set in Stone, of these chambers or doorways, and it's funny we all seem to have that, because it's alluring, like you said, to believe that is out there, and like, I love it. It's fascinating, and folklore tells us that it's entirely possible.
And what about you, Amanda? Where did you get your first influences to try to delve into extra realms,
I don't
realms?
even know.
Right?
My first influences?
Yeah.
I mean, it's been around for forever.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
obviously,
listen.
like, I grew up on Oz and Wonderland and all, Narnia and all that, so
Sure.
they all probably deeply influenced me. I was trying to think this whole time, like, because I'm like, there's so many, and I'm like, oh, I'm the last one.
There are so many.
People kept taking ones. I'm like, nope, not that one, not that one.
You're not allowed to double up. There's no rule. There's no rules
But I
here.
honestly so this is me being in my own world. I'm a big anime geek, like, and I love Japanese animation.
You know, we just talked about Japan.
and
There's plenty of anime.
I was thinking, like, you and I would probably get along really
Nothing
well.
Yeah.
But I just kind of wanted to like do a little subtle nod because like I love Hayao Miyazaki, and I think that a lot of his work, a lot of the movies that he's done, that I'm thinking like relatable things that most of us have seen, because I'm like, okay, something over here you probably haven't all seen it, but it's something like Spirited Away, you know,
Spirited
where
Away,
it just, and the symbolism of going over the water and that kind of thing, and going into another world, and you know, he does it in a couple of his different pieces, and I enjoy that.
But that kind of cross-cultural influence where you see comics and animation from Korea or the United States being heavily influenced by the Japanese, right? I mean, hugely influenced by the Japanese.
There's a lot of anime right now called isekai, and they're where they go to another world.
Yes.
There are so many.
Very common.
So many.
And you know, there are light novels now. There's even more books to consume outside of anime that the anime are based on. And those are just like the other world, and that's their the pop culture.
Or the show.
But that's the weird thing about anime, and even in the Japanese culture, is that demons are not always evil.
No.
They're not. They're not. And so you have they treat it so much so differently than the way we think of it. I mean, that was when people were talking about witchcraft and things, and I come from a family of Southern Baptists. So, with my writing and things, it gets a little. I get some bad stares and from time to time about that I'm glorifying magic. It's like, no, I said I'm treating it as something otherworldly, and everything. I said, yes, there are those like Wiccans who treat it more on the level playing field as everybody as our normal world, and that's fine. I said, I'm doing it in a different sense. I said, but you have to respect it no matter what, from either from the storytelling side or to the people who treat it differently.
Mike from Red Duke Games and I are working on something that we're right now calling Convocation. No, demons aren't evil, but that doesn't necessarily, they're not misunderstood good guys either. The entirely legal but also humorous boilerplate at the beginning is, this book won't teach you magic. No book will. And that's the how all the grimoires have gotten at least one important thing wrong, or intentionally left something out, is why no book teaches magic.
Jinn are very typical of that. They can really be good, or they can really be bad, or they can have their own agenda, or...
It's funny, it's the first thing I thought of, because we call them genies in our Western world.
Right.
It's a French version of J-A-N-N-I or D-J-I-N-N-I. Both versions are correct, except for genie. And they aren't the fun-loving Robin Williams or Will Smith trickster from Aladdin.
Oh, right.
Both were awesome, by the way. They aren't. They are just like us. In many cultures, you'll find the people who were here before us, that was the jinn. In Arab lore, in Celtic folklore, it was the fae. So I consider them like an Arab version of the fae. They're very, very similar. Both grant wishes or not. Jinn don't typically grant wishes. People think that a wish-granting genie is going to come out of a lamp and cure all their problems. Well, no. It's only that they are known tricksters, but it's the ones that want to have it after you, want to have a little fun messing with the human, that will do that. Otherwise, they're just like us. They're good, bad, and everything in between, and they have families, and that's the folklore behind them. And a lot of Muslims and Arabs are superstitious of them, and they think of them as real as anything else. I certainly believe they're real. Ms. Marvel, her family, the new series, her family gets their power because they're like jinn trapped in our world. And
that I didn't know.
Yeah, I've seen
that's
other
worth
takes on
watching.
that.
I thought it was actually mega bands.
They've changed the way the towers work from the comic, but I think what they did was clever. If while we're on the subject of Jinn, if I had a Hollywood pitch that I could get paid for, rather than get stolen from,
Show me the money.
I want to see a Quranically accurate I Dream of Jeannie.
Oh, that would be very interesting.
That would be
you know.
awesome.
As far as that's concerned, Loki is one of the most beloved, and if you look at Norse myth, Loki is both the biggest pain in the butt for them, but also saving the day, right? He's all over the place, right? He could be Loki, the guy who comes into the hall and insults everybody completely, you know, screws up Balder and everybody else, or Loki saves the day again, right? Because he's so clever.
Universally, the trickster is beloved, not just Loki, because if you win rightly for the good of the community, the rules matter less.
Yeah,
And we want that freedom.
Why do we love the clever kind of evil character so much sometimes, who can also save the day?
I think that they're kind of a depiction of how we are as humans.
That's true.
I think that
You know?
in many ways, like, we all have that little bit of, like, well, what if we all have that little evil trickster in us. And maybe we don't hear it as much as an adult, but I definitely remember when I was little, I used to have impulses, and I'd be like, no, that's bad. Like, shouldn't do that. But even now, I just kind of sometimes want to just go up and do this to someone's face and just, like, just have that impulse for no reason
good to know.
whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard that
I have excellent self-control.
the gods made humans in their own image, and then humans return the compliment, right?
Right, yeah, and I think that it's us playing a lot with that and kind of seeing, you know, almost in a way of saying, okay, like, here's the good and the bad, the pros, the cons of humoring this aspect of ourselves.
Right, and you know, we do love somebody that's a prankster, a trickster, or even the person who's incredibly good at sarcasm in stories. Like, who's had a character like that they thought, oh, this is a trickster or prankster or really sarcastic or can really give a shot to somebody when they need it, you know, and both helping them and taking them down a notch, right? Sometimes
I'm not sure that's a character. I think that's how many drinks have I had.
Yeah, we'll drink later. So, what about you, Liz?
Well, I think they don't have to have that self-control,
Right.
and I think that's fun to watch. And I also think the trickster is like on the edge of villain, like protagonist and antagonist, and they just get to balance on that edge. And sometimes they go this way, and sometimes they go that way. And watching them be like kind of the villain, but kind of the hero, I think that's like a nice fine line in a character or in a god.
We do a panel on villains and why we love them, right? Because we do, right? And Lucifer is one of those. You're rooting for the devil, right? Like in Lucifer, you're rooting for the devil, right? And we've seen this so often. We root for the trickster. In Loki, sometimes you're rooting for Loki, but he's awful, right? Like, you know, so... And sometimes you have the accidental trickster because the person's so inept that they.
I think that's the one thing comics has really done, and more so in the age of that, where the comic book movie is now so prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the fact of that they have romanticized that what we see in history and what we see through mythology into something not only I think more relatable in
Right.
today's day and age.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. Some of the most fun is when the more powerful, the more adept, the stronger loses because of cleverness, right? I mean, you know, you know, whether you trick the devil or not. And Jess, you definitely have some tricky folks in your writing.
I do, and a lot of sarcastic people. But if you want to know about why we love the trickster, it's because we were once 3 years old.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah, that is true. And sarcasm is the greatest thing ever. Okay, so
I will agree with that.
So, what do you have coming out, and where will we see you next?
Jess and I
Thank you,
just
Tom.
started a huge project.
What can title yet? No.
We've been doing this like 2 weeks. That's
Yeah,
how
so-
been
So time traveling steampunk novel is the word.
Time traveling steampunk novel and tarot deck.
And tarot deck is the.
And we have an artist that we found yesterday. So this is so new. It's shiny.
It's shiny.
And it's probably not going to come out till like 2025 because it's going to be a huge undertaking to plot everything out so that it works as a novel and as a tarot deck.
I believe in two things: get things out really, really quickly, or take your time and do it right.
This is something we want to do right.
That's basically my IT career.
Yeah.
Get it done tomorrow and do it right. No,
Yeah.
that doesn't happen. And Mr. Reed, where are your cats going to be next?
Oh, actually, the book that I just had printed up a few weeks ago, Steamy Town Punky Pops, I've got a bunch of those upstairs, so if any authors want a copy, you can have it at half price.
Mhm.
And that's the stories about.
But you do get the full book, not just half the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, just not the steamy town. You get the whole
Right,
pop.
so, yeah, I mean, basically, I wrote this to be appealing to both kids and adults.
Mhm.
Right, so it's these animals in the future trying to, where all the humans have disappeared, and they're trying to kind of piece together their civilization.
Mhm.
So there's a kind of a cross between past and future. So hence
Fine.
the steampunk part of it.
And Professor?
And then,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and then
The
the
punk?
next
The
one
punk.
I'm going to be writing is a spin-off from that called Balloonyville. Because it's like a city made of traveling balloons, like, you know, tons of them, and the animals kind of wander wherever the wind takes them. So that's kind of a spin-off, which I'm going to be.
Spirited Away type of thing. The
Yes.
Professor?
I just released a short story collection based on things that have been published in small journals. Some of them still with us, but I have the copyright for, but others have passed on, unfortunately. And that's on ProfessorCognum.com, and it's most of them all based in New England and alternate history type steampunk pieces.
And I thank Professor Cognum for wearing the goggles today because I've only seen pictures of him with the goggles and I don't know if I would have recognized him.
I did that. I originally came up with the whole idea of the nom de plume, again, to separate the academic
Academia?
writing,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it became an awful lot of fun. Yeah, I will try to always do that just for you.
My turn. I actually have a book coming out in August. I recently signed with a company, Curious Corbett Publishing. They're a Gothic publisher out of Ohio, and they're releasing it's a fantasy. I worked with a poet and worked a fantasy story with some poetry mixed in.
Mhm.
It's called River of Souls. It's about
Nice.
crossing over from one world to another through death. And so it's but that's coming out in August through Curious Corbett Publishing, and I'm actually doing a book signing at the historic Moravian bookstore in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Sunday, July 17th.
Oh, I could possibly be out there then. Jessica, you also write poetry.
I
and
do.
You recently started a new poem. I saw that online. So.
Yes, I'm always writing poetry. I've been really focusing on the craft of poetry during the pandemic. And luckily for me, there was this blossoming network of poets and poetry teachers who came to life during the pandemic and were willing to share their craft and willing to teach. And so I was very lucky to be a student of some very well-known and respected poets. But my newest poetry book is a very strange and juvenile title. It's called How Can I Steal a Purse? Which doesn't sound very poetic at all, but there you go.
It will not, much like Tom said, will not give you instructions on it.
It is not an
Still-
instruction
It's
manual.
not an instruction. So during the pandemic, I couldn't stop getting my hair cut. I learned that if you do that at a certain age, you look like Gandalf. The next thing that I have out is from Red Duke Games. It's the Demons and Angels. You're getting none of it correct, and this isn't going to correct you either. But it's hopefully an interesting story. Shared fiction, anthology setting, role-playing game setting. I have no idea when to tell you that that's going to come out. The Kickstarter for it was supposed to be this month. It hasn't happened yet. Interference by Demons.
Yes. The tricksters are out there.
They are. They certainly are.
Miss Fleury?
So, speaking of tricksters, I do have my story set in stone that again involves this Hindu god Jinn. So that I am working on. I don't have a set date for that, but I do have the sequel to the book I'm holding. Skyhawk Wanderlust is book 2 in the Skyhawk Adventure Saga, and that's about 100 pages in, but it was also 100 pages in like last July. So hopefully by next year, if I can really get a move on, I can get it going.
I would hit those deadlines if time travel were accessible to me.
Right?
You must be time traveling because you're conversing with everything everybody's done.
I my Google foo is very strong. Yeah, and you listen.
The Mechanical Masquerade came out yesterday.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
my, thank you. It's my 15th book, and it's a seasonal series of novellas set in the same steampunk universe. My next thing is a anthology that I am doing through my publishing company, Tourmaline and Quartz Publishing. So I did a call for short stories, and it's called Kingdoms of Wrath and Ice, and it's about villains, and they're all in wintry settings. So that'll be coming out in November.
Like Jadis, you know, villain, wintry settings, and you got the one of the winter, what's his name? Terry Pratchett, Tiffany Aching. I'll think of it in a second. I love Tiffany Aching, one of the greatest characters in all of fiction. Oh, maybe you haven't read Pratchett.
So the next thing I have out is my next novel in the Dark Covenant universe. It's called Dark Entry Guard. It's set in Dudleytown, Portal. And there's demons and fairies.
Demons and Fairies.
And I will be at Literally Love Savannah in a couple weeks.
Okay, and I myself, I'm shopping around that novel, like I said before, and I would say if you want to delve into dimension hopping that's kind of fun, that has both magic and science in it, Robert Asperin's Myth Adventures was a big influence on me, and then Jody Lynn and I, who I've met a couple times, is really, really nice, took over. But Another Fine Myth, I think, is the first one, which is actually a misquote from Laurel and Hardy, who, if I wear this hat and I'm shaven, I look like him. Friends of mine told me. Thank you so much.